Hi, everyone. Welcome. We might have more people joining in later on as well. So just some housekeeping. First of all, this meeting is being recorded. So if you would like, you can turn off your camera and also leave any questions in the chat if you don't want your voice to be recorded. Today we'll have some short presentations from our panelists, and then we will have questions from the audience at the end. I'll just give a brief introduction about me. I'm Sharon Pisani, and I'm the project officer for the CEUT project. The project has researchers working together with the community to see how Gaelic activities and digital activities can help conserve the heritage and increase community well-being. One of the project outputs was a survey of the North Uist community, and this webinar is a direct response to one of the results in the survey, where community members showed a strong inclination in favor of recording Gaelic place names. There are already digital tools available, such as OpenStreetMaps and the North Uist archive, which we will discuss later. But there is an interest to also record other media related to the place names. Very important in Gaelic, for instance, is the pronunciation, but there's also a lot of stories and music connected to the place names. Okay, so I will just introduce the panel members now. We have Uistgean Robertson, who's a local council member chairing the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He's a local to North Uist, and he's also the chair of the Community Uistatwa, which is the North Uist Historical Society. We have Julie Fowlis, who's a musician, singer, and place-based creator. She's a Gaelic speaker, originally from North Uist and now based in the Highlands. And she also spends time working as a TV and radio presenter and voice artist. We have Alan Miller, lecturer in Digital Heritage and Preservation at the University of St. Andrews. Over the last 12 years, he has worked with Taikersava Museum and CEUT in developing, recording, archiving, and exhibiting of island heritage. And his recent work focuses on strategies for decolonizing heritage and climate action. Finally, we have two members from OpenStreetMaps. We have Chris Fleming, who's a long-term contributor to OpenStreetMap, based in Edinburgh, and also serves on the OpenStreetMap Foundation. He has always loved maps, and the concept of completely open map data has immediately appealed to him. Colin, meanwhile, is a place name researcher focusing on names in Galloway and Dumfriesshire. He runs the DG Place Names on Twitter and the website. One of his current projects involves mapping Gaelic place names in southern Scotland, and he tells me he's up to 3,500 place names. Another hobby of his is adding Scots place names to OpenStreetMaps. So he was already telling us this beforehand, that Gaelic will need to be kind of given a priority in OpenStreetMaps. Finally, we also have a special guest who at the moment hasn't joined yet. He has sent his apologies if he's not able to join because his Wi-Fi is a bit sketchy, but we might have John Love, who's a zoologist and naturalist who's published several books about sea animals and natural histories, and he's also an invaluable guide of the Outer Hebrides. I see a lot of members as well from Community, such as Mary. There's also other members of the CEUT project, so welcome everyone. Welcome to all the people I've never met as well. Okay, let's start with some presentations. Maybe I'll start with Uistgean. Would you like to introduce us to North Uist and the community work that's so strong over there?
It's nice to be here and nice to be taking part. Of course, Uistgean Robertson, and as Sharon said, I am a local councillor. I've been a councillor for the last 16 years, and for the last 6, chair of transportation and infrastructure, bringing with me all the woes of Calmac ferries at the moment, which keeps me kind of occupied. I've been chair of Community Uist for a number of years now, and we took over the local school in Carnish, where I'm from and where I live. Mainly, we had intended to expand the provision at Taikersava, but because of issues with sea level rises, we weren't allowed to do that. So when the school in Carnish was closed, we put a bid in and got funding from the Scottish Land Fund to buy it. It's in fairly good nick at the moment, but we've had several unsuccessful bids into lottery funds and various other funds to do it up. Our ambition is to get our artefacts, which are currently stored with the Corla artefacts in Torlam and Benbecula. So it's quite difficult for us to get access to a considerable number of artefacts that we have there. The Corla's heritage officer has to attend with us, of course, if we want access to the area. Is not that good, and particularly over the winter period. We get families consistently who have donated to us, wanting to see what was donated by previous family members. So it's quite difficult for us to do that, which is why we're keen to expand the provision at Carnish and bring the artefacts into a kind of open storage area. So that's our ambition, really. Quite a lot of the members have been doing quite a lot of work in Carnish itself at the moment. So hopefully over the next year, we might have some success with funding applications. I know money is tight, particularly capital funding is very tight. We depend on our volunteers. We have a large number of trustees who are very active, and in most cases a lot more active than I am, I have to confess. My own interest in place names comes from the fact that I live here in Carnish. We have quite a well-known Kemble na Triana Trinity Temple is down behind our house here, and quite a lot of the place names round here. We have a hill behind the house is called Croch na Croshimora, the hill of the big cross, and to one side we have Croch na Croshenpeka, which is the hills of the small crosses. We have Topper na Trianet, which is the well for the temple. We have Loch na Trianet. Other people have called their houses Templeton, Templeside. We have Hotel Temple View. So, you know, it's all kind of adding up to really quite an interesting number of places being named after the temple. Crochgamel, we have the Hill of the Angels, so on and so forth. I think I'll leave it at that, Sharon, before. So I'll I know you give me 5 minutes and I tend to go over the top.
That's perfectly fine. It's interesting hearing about how much access to heritage is important. And I think activities like this will increase access to heritage as well. So I'll move on to Julie Fowlis. Nice to see you here. As a creator, you have been inspired a lot by your roots. You have also worked on recording place names, I believe. So could you tell us a bit more about your work?
Of course, Fisker Magavulu. It's, as Lucian said, it's lovely to be here and to see a lot of you. My work, I'm a musician and singer, and in the main, I sing in the Gaelic language, not exclusively, but most of my work is in the Gaelic language, and therefore it's difficult really to think of a Gaelic song that doesn't refer to place or landscape within the song. So I think that place names and connection to landscape has been a bigger part of my work before I even realized it was. Thinking about place names specifically, I guess I became far more interested in the place names of North Uist in particular during the time when I went back to university. After I'd completed my music degree, I went back, and I see Gordon Cameron is here, and we studied on the same course at the same time, a course called Culture Dúchasach agus an Áireanach, which is with a master's in material culture and the environment. And I remember for one of the essays that I had to do there, I interviewed some family members and found out names for rocks and bays and fields and little hillocks, things in the area where my own family are from, in US, places that I had never known, and I didn't know their names. And so that was the first time that I had taken an active, made an active effort to document some of these names. Fast forward several years, and I guess particularly during COVID, when I had more time than I had before, I spent a good bit of time at home in Uist, and spending time in particular with some relations and one uncle in particular, who, because he has spent most all his life at sea, he had quite an interesting take on place names. Many of the place names he shared with me were from the view of being at sea. So they were markers, they were rocks, rocks that were perhaps only exposed at certain times with the movement of the tide, reefs, outcrops, and things that might not be marked on maps, not that I could find, certainly. So I started to detail some of these names, and before long they had started to add up. There was 50, then there was 100, then there was 150, and now more close up to 200. And since then, people locally have started to give me, things have started to appear, people sharing, these were my papers that I found in my grandmother's house after she passed away, and they were lists of place names, things like that. And I'm currently just in the very early stages of working with the Commonwealth to try and compile some of these place names and try and prepare them for sharing in a way which is hopefully helpful going forward. I see Rudy McLean here is here as well, and he's somebody that I'd love to speak to get advice, because this is a project which seems to be growing arms and legs, and it's becoming more interesting by the day. So that's beyond my main music work. This is one kind of side passion project that has been ongoing for the last few years.
Yeah, that's really great. And I found very interesting what you said about kind of place names that are different based on the perspective of the people who use them, such as the people who are on the sea. That's really interesting. And I'm sure your work will also feature in the place names map that we are creating. So we'll be much more in contact later on. Our next panelist is Alan Miller. One of the results from the Arizona survey was that people wanted to record place names, in fact, and the stories that form part of the Gaelic landscape, especially in North Uist. So how can digital tools help in this regard, Alan? You're muted, Alan.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And it was great listening to the Julie and Houston, and we were up from St Andrews for Digital Fresh a few months ago, and then we came up again just a couple of months ago, and as part of that, we were looking at the Gaelic place names and really recording pronunciation of those names, because I mean, one of the things that seems to be really popular and seems to be happening is the pulling together and of heritage and of names and of place and the mapping of those. And we thought that as part of this Area Sund project, and in response to the survey that we did, which said, you know, how much interest and importance people were attaching to it, we thought that we could be part of creating a framework that would enable these names to be created and to be archived, but also to sit alongside digital representations of place and objects and intangible heritage that may be associated with those names. So the idea is, here we have a map of North Uist, and it's great to have people from OpenStreetMaps here, because that's the kind of technology we're using. We have an OpenStreetMap here, and we're hoping to then edit the map, the underlying map itself, and to enter the place names into it, and also here to create different hotspots. So I'll just choose one at random. So this is just a hotspot, and you probably won't hear it, but when you click that, you can then hear pronunciation of the name. So it's not just getting the written form of the name, it's also getting the pronunciation of the name. And then we have sitting behind this an archive system, which can hold the different pieces of heritage, 3D objects, and these things, and connect them with the places. So in that way, it's possible to explore the landscape using the map, see the place names, hear the place names, but also engage with any stories, any song, objects and photographs of those places. So really making it a very rich experience. And as part of Area Sund, what we're trying to do is to put in place a framework that will help that process along. And as I say, we're going to be in Carinish School on the 11th of August, and we'd invite everybody here to come along to that, and hopefully we'll be able to record lots of stories, and also lots of places and place names, and put them onto the map.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. That's really great. And I hope the webinar today will also give us an indication of how best to improve this map and the archive, and what to show, what kind of fields we need to record, things like that, because everything can be so important. Now I'll go to our last two panelists who are from OpenStreetMaps. We're not going into this completely uncharted. So OpenStreetMaps is an open license map that community members can contribute to. It's been in existence for years already. So I'll turn to you, Chris, now, and tell us a bit how OpenStreetMaps has worked in the past, perhaps.
There we go. I'm unmuted.
I think you're just on mute.
Thanks for having me along. It's really great to be involved, and massively appreciate that you've brought us in quite early on in the project. Quite often, people think of it later. It's kind of worth just introducing OpenStreetMap. I'll introduce myself first. My name's Chris Fleming. I'm kind of based in Edinburgh. I've been contributing to OpenStreetMap almost since the very beginning of OpenStreetMap. When I kind of started, the map was pretty much blank, and every trip somewhere was with the GPS recording tracks, because we didn't have any aerial imagery, and we started drawing out roads and putting in names of streets. And at that point, it was all done based on surveys. More recently, well, quite quickly, we then had aerial imagery and other data sources out of copyright OS maps, for example, we've used as well, and actually started building the map. And I think we're over 1 million people have actually created OpenStreetMap accounts and contributed to the map. Kind of covers pretty much every country in the world. Basically covers everywhere. And that's partly the strength of it. It's kind of a note-free. It's a bit like Wikipedia in that anybody can edit. There's no layers of people checking. Actually, you can create an account and you can edit. And we rely on people to do the right thing. We also rely on people watching what's changed and fixing things. If people do vandalize the map, it does happen, but it generally gets fixed quite quickly. So the system, as a system, it's worked very well. It's all built by volunteers largely. There are some people that get paid by various companies to map, but most of the work is done by volunteers, and we kind of try and encourage that as much as possible. The idea is it's on a license that allows free access to anybody. The main thing we ask for, if people use the map, or they kind of put by OpenStreetMap contributor, so they kind of acknowledge the data source, and that really just helps people to know where the data's come from. So that's our main kind of thing that we ask for. There's a few other caveats in there, but that's generally the idea. In general, the map data is not owned by any one company. There's a kind of an OpenStreetMap Foundation that looks after it. Again, that is all run by volunteers. I think we currently have 2 employees kind of that do some of the kind of running of the servers and some of the kind of admin work, but generally it's all run by volunteers. And that's kind of, again, quite intentional. Really, we're a data project more so than the maps you see on the screen, and that's quite important. One of the things is actually, even if you've never heard of OpenStreetMap, you've probably seen OpenStreetMap data. Lots of people are using it. The maps on Facebook are powered by OpenStreetMap data. Apple use OpenStreetMap in some parts of the world. If you planned a cycle ride on Commute or Cycle Streets, or almost all the cycle planners use OpenStreetMap. There's phone apps that use OpenStreetMap. And they all use it because we're a data source. It's there, it's available, it's global as well. And the raw data is always available. One of the great things is flexible tagging. And I think it's probably one of the reasons OpenStreetMap took off, rather than trying to decide how to classify basically everything on the planet. It was just left open. So actually, one of the things when I was looking at this, I was like, can we record pronunciation? And actually, yes, we do. There's quite a few objects. So there's a name pronunciation key as well. That may be something to think about, as well as having the recorded pronunciation. Is actually, if someone can write that phonetically, that is possible to record on OpenStreetMap as well. The other thing probably I want to say is, really, we thrive on local participation. And again, that's why it's really exciting to get involved in projects like this. Actually having people on the ground know about OpenStreetMap. Yeah, I kind of look at what's changing. Oh, that shop's closed, or that shop's opened, or there's a new road there, or that road's now one way. Actually, as things change locally, you really need local people to be able to follow it and update it. And so kind of what I would love everybody, if people on this call kind of go and look up OpenStreetMap, feel free to create an account. Don't be worried, just see what's right, see what's wrong. If you want to put your house number or a house name in, things you know about, just go ahead, edit the map. There is an edit button on there. I wouldn't say don't be careful, but I'm not sure other people came in, made mistakes, and then learned how to use it and fix it. It's better to try and participate. That's my main thing. Also, probably if people do want to do more editing, or there's an interest in that, then we'll probably be very happy to kind of run a session, do some tutorials, whatever as well. If people find that, if people want to do that. That's all I've got. That's me for now.
Thank you, Chris. That's really good. And what's important, I think, about OpenStreetMap, as you said, is that it's available internationally. So place names that are added there can be seen and used by people, just using a totally different application, and they're still getting access to this Gaelic record of the place names. So I turn to Colin now, and can you tell us a bit more about some of the features that are available when recording place names, especially Gaelic ones, as we're saying, on OpenStreetMaps?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks very much for having me. Delighted to be speaking to you all. I'm going to share my screen because these examples are a wee bit easier with visual reference. And perhaps once I do, Sharon, you could let me know if it's come up. Hopefully, you should now be able to see this. So hello folks, I'm Colin. I go by DG Place Names on Twitter, OpenStreetMap and GitHub. I run a website that's about place names, but also stuff about Scots language and folklore down in the southwest of Scotland. And so I do a lot of place names research, particularly Gaelic in the southwest, and I do a lot of stuff on OpenStreetMap that's not to do with place names, but where it overlaps and where I started becoming interested in it was when looking at Scots place names in Dumfries and Galloway. So for a wee bit of context, in the mid-19th century, the Ordnance Survey arrived, started mapping everything, did a wonderful job, but when it came to Scots, it began anglicising most, not all, but most Scots place names. So here's a wee example. In Dumfriesshire, we have Lake Todholes. It was mapped locally the year before the OS turned up, and then the year later, the OS records this as Low Todholes. So you get the word lake, which is Scots for low, sort of excised from the map. And because the OS did such a wonderful job, these names have been replicated over and over and over. And what we find is that the presence of Scots names gets reduced. And then that has all sorts of implications for the status and the visibility of Scots and sort of ramifications for the language in general. So I was wondering, how could we address this? You can't change the OS, but you can change OpenStreetMap. And we've got similar issues with Gaelic in Dumfries and Galloway, in that most of our place names are Gaelic, it's just they're not written in standard Gaelic spelling, which means that most people don't know that they're Gaelic. If we rewrote them in Gaelic spelling, D&G would look a wee bit like North Uist on the map. So I thought what I could do is give you a wee example of how we can record multilingual data in OpenStreetMap. I'll try and go through a few examples. And while the forward-facing part of OpenStreetMap is a map, it's best to think of it as a big geodatabase that can sort of store a huge amount of rich and interlinked data. So I will nip through this, hopefully, because there's slides you'll be able to refer back to. So when you find the feature, it can be as small as anything or as big as a city. The main name tag we're concerned with is name, and this is what is called the common default name. That can be a little bit tricky where there's contested names, but usually it's the name that folk on the ground use. So in your case, up in North Uist, it'd usually be a Gaelic name. You can then specify if it has other names by using language tags. So you can give it an EN or an SCO or a GD for English or Scots or Scottish Gaelic names. And if you are putting in Gaelic names, just as the name tag, I'd encourage you to also specify the language code, which makes it easier for machines to read this and know that it's Gaelic. So just a quick wee example, there's a farm in Galloway called Murdrocket. The OS came and anglicised it to Muirbroch Wood, but the Scots name better represents that it's actually a Gaelic name underneath, Margdrochage, Markland of the bridge. And while the OS won't show that, you can go into OpenStreetMap, you can edit it, you can give it its English name, its Gaelic name, and its Scots name. And because this is recorded, and because I've set my OpenStreetMap to Scots, when I click on the feature, it displays Mardrocket, it displays its Scots name. If I search its Gaelic name, Mardrochage, it will bring up the English name too. So when you're encountering names up in North Uist, they may have multiple names, and it's great that you're able to record these. So those are your basic tags. You can tag them with language tags. However, you can also give them extra things. Something might have a local name, like a nickname. It might have an alternative name, might go by two names, might have an old name, and you can tag this all too. And you can tag each of those with language codes as well. So some examples from Dumfries where I've recently been. So there's a bridge called Evergilla Bridge in Scotland. Evergilla Brig is also known as the Old Bridge, and in Scots it's known as the Albrig. And you can code all of this into OpenStreetMap, and if you search any of those tags, they'll come up. Another bridge down the river is very uninventively known as Suspension Bridge. It's also known as Biddles Brig, but the locals call it the Shugley Brig, because it shuggles about. And you record all of this in OpenStreetMap. You can add a tiny little bit more fine-grained detail by giving etymology tags. Etymology, not quite what I'm used to thinking of, a dictionary definition etymology, but what the place is named after. And you can link these to other data sources too. I'll give you a quick example of a rock in Galloway called Lot's Wife. And you can add a wee tag saying it's named after the biblical character who was turned into a pillar of salt. You can also link this to Wikidata and Wikipedia in images. And if you do have archive material, pronunciations, songs in your archive, I'd encourage you, if you are able to, stick these onto Wikidata too, because it means that you get, it's quite hard to show you here, but it's amazing the amount of interlinked sort of data processing you can do with this. And finally, maybe just another thing, if you are considering putting in descriptive data, you might want to use this description tag rather than the etymology tag, because it means that you're able to write descriptions in different languages that aren't tied to the form of the name. So if you want to write up your notes in Gaelic, you could use a description GD, and then you could also have a description EN to put in English descriptions too. And here's a wee example of the sycamore gap tree, which I looked up, and somebody has written a wee German description of it. Says it's known from the Kevin Costner film. Excellent stuff. And I can maybe skip this and come back to that later using OpenStreetMap as a source, but you might be interested in some other projects that might be useful. So down in Borg, they did a community project mapping all the fields on OpenStreetMap, but wonderful. Mapio Cymru has done a huge amount of Welsh language mapping, might be worth talking to them. The OpenStreetMap wiki is very useful for getting information on all these keys. And finally, Anne-Caroline Distel, OSM for History Buffs on YouTube, is got a huge amount of information about how to map local tiny names. So hopefully that gives you a wee bit of info on how you can map using OpenStreetMap. And like Chris said, I'd really encourage you, just even if you're not the North Uist project, to go create an account and start mapping some information. Thanks very much.
Some of the discussions we've already had in trying to establish this place names project, especially with regards to different variants of the same name and how to represent that and how to show it. So that's very helpful. I'll just start by asking a few questions to the panel, but everyone is also welcome to raise their hands or drop questions in the chat box. Firstly, I wanted to find out a little bit more about some of the themes that can be found in Gaelic place names, especially in North Uist. And before I start, I see that John Love has managed to join in. I think he had some issues with his audio, so I will just see if he's hearing us now. Or we might get back to John Love in a second. Yeah, I think he's still setting up and making sure his audio works. So we'll get back to John Love soon. In the meantime, maybe Ujjan or Julie might have a lot more information about some of the themes that can be found in Gaelic place names.
I'm certainly, it's important to say that I don't profess to be any expert on the etymology or the naming or anything. I suppose the biggest and the most obvious thing to say is that the place names, I think this is typical for so many of Gaelic place names, is that they're very descriptive. They tell you a lot about the place. Sometimes they can tell you something about the history or the use of a place, how it may have been used. So there are lots of different elements. I don't know if Lucia would like to say something about that.
I think you're right. It's mainly the history. I've quite an interest in archaeology myself, you know, and there's quite a lot of archaeological sites in Carinish here, you know, and the description of some of these sites come, you know, Dunbar and the White Fort out in near me here, the Long Cairn. It's as I've said earlier, you know, talking back to Temple na Tian, and all the names round it, like the Hill of the Big Cross, the Hill of the Small Crosses, Croch na Nail, Hill of the Angels, Loch Anapa, you know, Loch of the Abbots, and so on and so forth. And in Beckela, you see Nant and Ballinagallach, and all that kind of, there's a lot of kind of religion, I think, in terms of some of the place names. But you see some very odd names too. We have Elenichonstri, for example, you know, which is quite near here, which would suggest a big argument of some kind at some point. Whatever, but you know, again, you know, we've got Féin Father in Carinish, where the Battle of Carinish was fought in 1601, although some people would suggest there was more bloodshed at Dance in Carnish Hall than there was at the Battle of Carnish. But anyway, it's that kind of thing. It is kind of a description of the place, and it kind of basically tells you what happened there, what it's about, you know, and it's all round us really. But like yourself, Julie, I'm not a huge expert on the topic either. Just fascinated by knowing the names, you know, and I wish I could have more time to find out some more of the history behind it, you know.
Interest in people about how place names came to be, and especially in the case with Gaelic place names, there's a lot of places that can have multiple names to them as well. Maybe, as Julie said earlier, it's because of different perspectives on how people see places, and as you've said as well, places are kind of named after their landscape. So if the landscape changes, does that mean that the place name will also change? And I have this in mind, perhaps, how does the effect of climate change affect the landscape and therefore the place names? I don't know if John Love's audio is working here, but if you would like to jump in at any point, just go ahead, John. Unfortunate. I think his audio is still not working. So yeah, so how does climate change perhaps affect place names? Have there been any cases where, for instance, a name is called, you know, an island, for instance, it's referred to as an island, but now it doesn't get separated with the tides anymore, or something similar like that?
I have to be honest with you, I can't kind of recollect anything changing on the back of, I could be wrong, you know, on the back of climate change. We had Comunity had a discussion probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago in relation to climate change, and listening to some recordings from the School of Scottish Studies that were done probably in the early 50s, you know, and we listened to somebody at that time talking about basically climate change. We all think it started happening 2 or 3 years ago, but this was showing quite significant changes, you know, within parts of North Uist in the 50s. So it's always been there in a sense, but I can't honestly think of anything, you know, in terms of place names changing on the back of climate change. I could be wrong.
I could maybe give a few examples from Galloway, in that we've got quite a few places called Garvillan, which would be Garavalan, you know, Rough Island, that are no longer islands, and that seems to be, they were probably named about 800 years ago, and the glacial rebound, so long-term climate change, sort of the land is raised and the sea level has gone down around them. So we've got a few rough islands that are no longer, and it may just be that we've there'll be some places, low-lying places, I'll maybe see changes quicker than others, but we do have some historical examples of change.
Thank you, Colin. I see there's a couple of questions already from the audience. I just have one question towards the OpenStreetMap team here, and I've seen it as well in the comments already. With community entered data, how can we be sure that people are entering the correct data? Does anyone check it?
So officially, nobody checks it. What tends to happen sometimes is, certainly I have a kind of a feed I get of new editors who are making changes. So quite often we'll keep an eye on people if I've not seen their name editing before, and I think there's others that do the same, and we just make sure it makes sense. Generally, we've not had, yeah, I would say, I'd love to say we've never had problems with people, what we would call vandalism, and we have. Generally, it's been caught quite quickly, and generally gets fixed very quickly. But sometimes you have arguments where one person says it's this, someone else says it's that, and we do have, again, what we really encourage is people to actually kind of just talk to each other and come up with agreements. I mean, I think given the size of the project, these are incredibly rare. We have a kind of what's called a data working group, and actually, if you're really stuck with someone, you can basically escalate it up to them, and they'll kind of make a call on it, and they've got the power to do things like ban accounts and things. I would say in Scotland, I've only ever had to ask them to intervene once on an edit. I'd say OpenStreetMap in Scotland, we've really not had any big problems like that. So generally, we rely on goodwill. People generally do the right thing. Mistakes are generally genuine mistakes that actually you can discuss with people. One thing that is worth saying is we do keep a history, so you can go back and you can see who's changed what and when, and so you can unwind things if people have been messing things up. So yeah, nothing is permanent. All the history is kept, and it's kind of interesting. You can kind of click on a feature. It's kind of one of the nice things you can do on the right-hand side on OpenStreetMap. There's like a menu bar, and you can go, this is version, I think, if I look at the North Uist, what's called a relation, it's on version 30. You can see all the changes every time someone's added things, removed things, added names, all that stuff. It's all kept, and it's worked very well.
It's maybe worth just saying as well that you can add, when you make a change, not that I always do, but I try to, you can cite your source as you change. So if you're super conscientious, you can get a change log and see where this information is coming from. So quite often you'll put in local source, local farmer. And I think, yeah, I mean, I've never seen any vandalism other than good-natured mistakes.
from the perspective of the map we're building, at the moment, it's going through a process where if someone adds a name, it will be private first before it's checked by someone and then made public. So there's kind of that added level of security, so to speak, that it's not just going to be something totally random. I see John and Kumin, I hope I don't break the name too much, have their hands up. So I'll go to John and ask you about your question, John.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks to Uistinn, Julie, Alan, Colin, and Chris for the perspectives and for what was a very enlightening session for me. I'm not an expert on place names at all, but I was born and brought up part of my childhood in Loch Maddie in North Uist, and all my antecedents come from North Uist. So a couple of things on the climate change. I think someone's mentioned it in the chat that the little island of Ballasher, East Island on the southwest side of North Uist, is now part of an island which was a much larger island, which probably part of which disappeared during the Lindsay-Vik, the Little Ice Age, sometime in the last 500 years. And there was a Ballasher, a west island, and another township called Husebost, which are now under the waves. So I suppose that's not anthropogenic climate change, but it's the climate change that's happened over the last century. So you've got the anomalous thing of having an east town where there isn't a west town because it's gone. The other thing I wanted to mention is, or I suppose my question is, how would you take account of place names that have changed over the centuries in OpenStreetMaps? I was thinking of something I learned from my grandmother, which was the loch that my grandfather's croft was beside, which is here. That's Loch Stramur in just outside Loch Maddie, with the hills Liatúa, Liages, and Avel. Well, in about a century ago, it was known as Loch an Astrom, and that's recorded on an Ordnance Survey map. And then the next Ordnance Survey map, in the early 10 years later, was known as Loch an Stramur. Loch an Astrom is Norse, and it means, as far as I can see, loch of the river stream, which is actually a very good description of the place. The river is smooth flowing and the stream is sort of rough and fast. So how would we record that on OpenStreetMaps if I had, and attribute it if I so wished? Thank you.
Well, there's a tag specifically for that, which is fab. It's great that you've got the old name and two its date as well. So first of all, you'd put it in as old name and then tag it as Gaelic, so old_name : GD, and then you would put that in. And where there's multiple historical names, you can then append a date range to it as well. So I'm not sure when the first head of the West up in your area was, but say 1854, you could tag it as old name Gaelic 1854, whatever it was, and then when the second edition was 1890s and so on, you could tag that as well. So another way of doing it is linking the name to Wikidata, and which is a repository of basically everything in the universe, which is going to be a bit overwhelming, but Wikidata can store umpteen forms of the name as well. So it can be recorded straight into OpenStreetMap, which is great because you can search for it within it, or you can refer on to another database.
Thank you very much, Colin. It's interesting, the name changed from a name of Old Norse origin to a name of Gaelic origin, although the Old Norse must have persisted for 1,000 years after the Vikings had gone. Yeah,
it's fascinating that lots of the Gaelic names have Norse roots up in the Hebrides. You could also, if you knew the exact form of the Old Norse, you could even tag the Old Norse name in OpenStreetMap, and you could put it in its Old Norse form too. A lot of scope.
From Human, please correct my pronunciation. You're on mute, by the way.
Thanks. you're near enough with the pronunciation. Various questions, comments. The first are to do with OpenStreetMap. Naming is very complicated, and it's kind of been covered. You can't say what's the Gaelic name for things. If it's in North Uist and it's got a Gaelic name, then that's a good quality Gaelic name. But if it's Motherwell Tupper na Maher, that might be a retro translation from the English, and then you get sort of fun translations like Genzie Nua for New Jersey, and I don't know, English na Manachlia, Greyfriars Kirk in Edinburgh. So it's good to see that there are alternate names, scope for alternate names in the various languages. One thing I was wondering about, I collected place names locally, but way back, from people, most of whom have since died. But sometimes looking back, we don't know where the names were, and there's other people have collected names and we know roughly where they are. So I was wondering whether StreetMap has a sort of radius of uncertainty. Has it got scope for, has it got some tag or field for saying how uncertain things are? Maybe lists that Julie Fowler's got from her grandmother. She might know where some of them are, but not know where other ones are. A couple of things not to do with OpenStreetMap. When we were collecting place names, various people were named, but they're in old folks' homes and they're certainly not fit to walk the hills now. I was wondering, but with modern technology, that was 25 years ago. Could you go into an old folks' home and show them Google Earth and sort of walk the moors and show them the view from such and such a hill, and would that wake up memories? I don't know whether that might be a useful project to do for people that used to walk the hills aren't able for it now. Just in passing, there's somebody local, very good Gaelic, in Slate where I am, and his daughter asked me, we've got this project, and I think they've even got a bit of funding for it to get names from him and other people. Do you know any software? So I suppose I should refer them to OpenStreetMap and try and put people together. That's all my questions and comments.
Would like to pick up on any of that.
So for the question about if you don't know exactly where something is, again, I think from the perspective of when we started, actually, you do the best you can. You put it in the location. I would say at the very least add a note to it to say, I'm not 100% certain where this is, but and you can record that in there. And then actually later on, what's great is someone else goes, oh, actually, I think it was more that way. They can move it around and things. So it's all about get the information that you know is to the best of your knowledge, and then actually other people can come down and improve it over time. So I think that makes sense.
Thank you. I also have a question regarding categories of places, and I've seen a similar question in the chat as well. Basically, what are some of the categories that are related to places in North Uist? For instance, there's a hill, but there's also a hillock. Is that a completely different category? Is that shown in the same category? And how can we establish kind of this list of categories with the community? Maybe Ujjan or anyone else really from the community could have an answer to that.
I'm not sure I followed the question, Sharon.
So when we are recording place names, we also try to record the category. For instance, is this place name a river? Is it a hill? Is it a lake? How are these categories defined? For instance, would the hill and the hillock be a completely different category?
Well, I mean, we mentioned Gilliverland earlier, which is Broad Island. We have down behind our temple, we have Gilliverland Moor and Gilliverland Bay, which goes to the large and the small. That seems quite common around here to have, as I mentioned, Crochry, the big hill and big small hill. So you get that, you get the the Loch do, you know, your colours, sizes and everything appears to come in to some of the place names I know around here anyway. Is that what you're?
Yeah, that answers my question a little bit as well. And perhaps because, you know, in preparing a list of categories to input in our own place names, we've created the most common ones, such as hill, lake, etc. Is there anything else that might be of interest in the North Uist landscape? But perhaps other people from the community could also be able to answer that. I see Erdal also has a hand up, so I'm not sure if that's an answer to this question, but feel free to ask any other question as well.
Hi Sharon, hi everybody. Can you hear me? Can you confirm that you can hear me? Okay, nice to meet you all. I'm participating in this awesome meeting from Turkey. I'm a geographer and GIS expert. Working on toponymy. Concerning your first question about climate change and place names, I would like to add something which is a reverse effect where I am working in the Pontic region of Turkey on the border with Georgia. The Eastern Black Sea region, we have Georgian names, Turkish names, Armenian names, Greek names, and a little bit of Arabic names, very big mixture. So when I started working on this, I realized a big problem in reverse climate change. The climate in this place became a little bit more mild and let's say favorable for the vegetation. The whole villages and toponymy names all were related for the areas that were open from the forest by the people who try to do agriculture. Due to the internal migration, the land is regaining its original forest character so fast that it is almost impossible to establish a database where you say that, okay, this place was an agricultural land and it has their name. And people said, no, it's a forest. It has never been agricultural land. So the land is losing its original character or changed character, and the toponymy name becomes something floating in the air. So this is my very big problem. I don't know how to solve. And in the second hand, what you have said is a big issue, and it's almost 2 years that I am trying to prepare a proper geodatabase to categorize place names, because without the geodatabase, if you are working with some hundreds of some thousand names, it's easy to arrange them in Excel data sheet. But when you become bigger and bigger, then you have to use some sort of computer code, some SQL queries. And for those things to work, you have to categorize your names. And before collecting data from the field, in the very beginning, you have to have an overall image and all the different data sets, all the possible, let's say, column names, then you can categorize. Because if you cannot categorize, then you cannot add as much as data into the map correctly as you wanted to. And I am also trying to understand how we can use GIS to solve especially this problem for categorizing place names in terms of their origin, meaning, reference to the landscape. So, thank you
for your experience, and I think that's definitely something that we will take on board, is that categories will change, especially as the database grows with more names as well. So thank you for your contribution. We are running close to the end of this meeting. I will take one last question from Paul. Any other questions in the chats, we will go through them and we will send an email afterwards as well with any replies. So Paul, your last question. Thank you.
Hello. I was just really going to make a comment about that categorization thing. It's one of the problems that in my working life, I was an asset manager for structures, and we often had difficulty in describing what things were and keeping them common to do that. But we did manage to work around it with some kind of associations so that you could associate a knoll with a hillock, for example, and they would show up in the same thing. So it may be some way that can happen OpenStreetMaps, I don't know. That would be a question for one of the boys that's familiar with it. Yeah, that's my observation on that one, really. I was just also going to say, I live in the Isle of Man, and we have a lot of the similar things going on in the Isle of Man, and it's great to see it happening in Uist as well, North Uist as well.
Everywhere joining this webinar. We're reaching the end of the webinar, so I just wanted to ask one last question to the panelists and a very quick answer from you. What does place mean to you? And I'll leave it free for anyone to start that off. Maybe Alan, because it seems I've put people on the spot here. What does place mean?
Thanks for me. I mean, what does place mean for me? I think that place, the most evocative thing about place is music and song that is associated with it. So for me, the sort of the combination of a landscape and song that tells a story about the landscape is the probably most powerful thing that we can see, that we can get. So I think that the sort of challenge of preserving heritage and connecting it with place is something that is fascinating. And that's a map of place names in Sleat as well. Maybe we'd be able to do something there to accompany.
Maybe Julie, you're a place-based creator. So what does place mean to you?
I think in short, when you have an understanding of place or an awareness of place, and especially place names and what they mean, it opens up the landscape and the community to you in an entirely different way. It tells you stories, it tells you what has gone before, who has gone before, and the landscape is completely alive to you in an entirely different way.
Well, I think it means something similar to me as it does to Julie. I think that's an excellent way of putting it. I suppose places, just like other things, are a means for indexing memories. So it's important to be able to route yourself through them. And I think in terms of place names, it's the fact that they can operate as a time machine. They let you read the landscape, and importantly, they record the lives and experiences of folks you don't usually hear about in other historical records. So it's no kings and queens. It's farmers and fisher folk that were round about the bit that you live.
Possibly because I'm on holiday, I'm thinking of place as adventures, places to go, you know, what to do, where you want to be, exciting adventures and the stories around them.
Thank you. And finally, to end with Eugen, what does place mean to you?
We're always asked this question. To me, it's always, I always answer the Gaelic language is simply that. But going back to the contribution from Turkey, I was in Turkey actually 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was thinking the contribution there's a hill quite near me here, which is called Pinnaculla, which is Hill of the Wood. So there must have been woods there at some point, you know, and when we're hitting peats, we're always coming across trees. If you go dig deep enough, so it shows the climate was quite different some considerable time ago. So I hadn't thought of that when we were talking about it earlier, so that was a useful contribution, I have to say. But for me, sense of place is basically what Julie and the others said, but Gaelic language is very important to me in terms of sense of place.
In the chat and the panelists, thank you very much for joining us. Our next webinar is about climate, heritage and well-being. It also tackles an issue that was raised during the Errorson survey. I've dropped a link to the Eventbrite on the chat, and I would also suggest checking out CEUT's Facebook page. They have the summer festival going on at the moment. So there's a lot of activities, including walks to some of the heritage sites. So if you're in North Uist and able to join that, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much to everyone who left comments in the chat. We will go through them, see if we missed anything, and we will send around an email with any other information. There's quite a lot of wealth of information in the chat. So thank you and good night, everyone.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you,
Good
Sharon.
night. Dankjewel. Dankjewel.
Dankjewel.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.